Some of the best anime broships begin as rivalries. Think Goku and Vegeta, Naruto and Sasuke, Gojo and Geto. Wait, that last one's not quite right. That one goes in the opposite direction. But the point is, Berserk has its own version of the rivals turned friends trope in the form of Guts and Serpico. The two warriors first meet as enemies, and it's clear from the beginning that they're itching to have a go at each other. Well, they get two opportunities to do that, and both of these fights are some of Berserk's most underrated. But that brings us to the question we asked in the video's title. Will it happen again? And who would win if it did? Let's find out. Guts vs. Serpico, the prelude. You hurt my mistress, and I will make you pay for that. To understand why Guts and Serpico came into conflict with each other, it's important to understand the context within which they met each other. And that context, as it just so happens, was a religious one. After the eclipse, the Holy Iron Chain Knights were dispatched to the eclipse site to confirm the beginning of the end. All the telltale signs of the prophecy of the Falcon coming true were there, and Farnace decided that the source of the grisly events they'd been investigating was the mysterious Black Swordsman, aka Guts. After searching several villages near the fabled Misty Valley, one of which was Jill's, the Holy Iron Chain Knights finally managed to corner their target. But Serpico is the only one who can tell none of them stand a chance against him. Despite his outwardly goofy demeanor, Serpico is a rather skillful warrior, and his rapier could have been the last thing many noble suitors of Farnace saw in their lives. The only reason Serpico holds back in a fight is because he doesn't want to upstage people and draw more attention to himself. He's perfectly content with being on the sidelines and doing sarcastic play-by-play of the action unfolding in front of him. But when we saw an injured Guts kill 6 people in one fell swoop, he knew the pretty boy knights would have no chance against him. When the veteran Azan stepped in, Serpico playfully cheered him on, but made no attempt to leave Farnace's side because, in his mind, his primary job was to protect her. So, when Guts sidestepped Azan and decided to capture Farnace instead, Serpico knew he had to involve himself. He quickly and precisely targeted an open arrow wound on Guts' left side with a branch, which was enough to stun the Black Swordsman's approach and make him fall onto Farnace's sword. His chest piece saved him from getting impaled, but the pain and the impact of the sword made Guts pass out momentarily. Serpico kept his involvement in this entire ordeal quiet, of course. He let Farnace take all the credit gladly. You can find out more about their dynamic and why it's relevant here by checking out our video on the disgusting truth about their relationship, but then Guts openly antagonized Farnace after waking up as a prisoner, and that's where Serpico took umbrage with him. Serpico could tolerate 1,000 insults to his person, but to his sister he could withstand none, and Guts constantly mocked Farnace's fragile faith as she tried to torture him for information, which didn't go unnoticed by Serpico. So when he finally managed to kidnap Farnace from her camp, Serpico was the first to follow. Halfway through the chase, Serpico was slowed down by a few deceased spirits that he could see because he didn't personally believe in any faith, so he had to use the tracks left behind by Guts' horse to hunt them down. He had clearly missed a lot of things, because by the time he had caught up with them, Farnace was, we don't know how else to put this, riding Guts' sword, literally. Serpico knew he needed to get her out of there before he did anything else, but as he was escorting Farnace to his horse, he couldn't resist but firing off a warning shot. This was twice Farnace had cried because of that man, and Serpico needed to make him pay. When Guts turned his back to Farnace and Serpico as he departed the scene, Serpico drew his rapier and swung it in Guts' face. The Black Swordsman turned his back, knowing something like this would happen apparently, because he swung back, aiming for Serpico's feet. Both of them came off with scratches only, Guts with another scar on his face and Serpico a missing shoe sole. But in that brief exchange, they'd measured each other up. Before attacking Guts, Serpico told Farnace, who had commanded him to kill the swordsman, that he couldn't do it. He reasoned that Guts was too strong, and that seemed like that until he did what we mentioned earlier. After that brief exchange, Serpico promptly left with Farnace in tow, after bidding farewell to both Guts and Puck. The former was frustrated because he wanted to fight Serpico now that his appetite had been piqued, but the latter was more interested in this duo that would soon become a part of their party. Turns out, both of their curiosities would end up being sated soon enough, thanks to causality. Guts vs. Serpico, Round 1. Hill Raves, Heretics, and defending Farnace's honor. The first time Guts and Serpico face off against one another isn't too long after their brief skirmish. It's during the Conviction arc, a few hours after Guts arrives in the holy city of St. Albion. Serpico was there because after the fiasco that was botching the Black Swordsman's capture, the Holy Iron Chain Knights had been reassigned to protection duty for the bloody Inquisitor Mozgus. Father Mozgus had a particular love of torturing those he deemed to be heretics, and while Serpico personally detested his methods, he didn't interfere with them because it wasn't his place to do so. He simply wanted to see Farnace safe and sound, who, on the other hand, took to Mozgus's ideals like a glove to a hand. Guts came there because he was searching for Casca, who was supposed to be somewhere in St. Albion if his demon child's prophetic warnings were accurate. After the eclipse took her sanity away, Casca became an easy target for predators, human and inhuman alike, because of her brand of sacrifice. When she was in Godot's cave, she was safe, because that ore cave was a former haunt of the elves, protected by some seriously strong magic. When she escaped, she pretty much became a beacon for all things that lurk in the dark, and if it wasn't for her demon child's powers, she'd have died on her first day in that holy city. It is at a point where Guts and Serpico's missions collide with one another that they have their first proper duel. After spending a few days under the protection of Luca and her girls, Casca ends up getting kidnapped by the heretics that Serpico and Farnace are hunting. This is because one of Luca's girls, Nina, is a part of their group. Called the Cult of the Flame Goddess in semi-canon sources, these people worship a manifestation of Slan that compels them to shed their human boundaries and become unbounded carnal beasts. They end up thinking Casca is a witch ordained to lead them because a few of those heretics saw the power of her brand of sacrifice. So they take both girls with them, intending to sacrifice Nina to Casca to force some kind of advent. Serpico and Farnace find out the location of the heretics' cave thanks to one of Nina's former customers, Joachim, who leads them to it. Call it coincidence or causality, but around the same time, Guts arrives at that cave as well thanks to Isidro, who was tracking Casca, and Puck, who broke the sound barrier to bring Guts to her location. As soon as he arrived, the Black Swordsman started cleaning house because every single heretic in that location had been possessed by evil spirits, and their leader, the Great Goat, had been turned into a pseudo-apostle. Guts told Isidro to leave the cave with Nina and Casca. Using a back exit, Isidro spotted the Great Goat trying to escape from, but this was also noticed by Serpico, who made up his mind to make Guts disappear. Serpico resented Guts because of the way he made Farnace break down and start questioning herself. When she got the news about the Heretics' Hill Rave hideout, she was also apprised of the Black Swordsman's presence in St. Albion. On the outside, she told her men to stick to their current assignment and shut down Izan's proposal to capture him as well. But internally, she was freaking out because he made her question some of her deepest, most foundational beliefs, and that pissed Serpico off to no end. He could tell she was completely shaken whenever she was around Guts, and he couldn't have that. Where she had told them to let him go earlier, now she was asking her men to kill everyone that didn't surrender or submit, and rushing to kill Guts herself, the first chance she got. Farnace was scared of what this complete stranger would say to the world about her shameful night with him, and Serpico had to pull her aside to save her from an approaching heretic. He knew if this continued for too long, Farnace would crumble, so when he saw Isidro taking the girls out the back exit and Guts staying to fight the monster, he knew what he had to do. We've already mentioned that Serpico is a skilled warrior, but it goes deeper than that. He's been punished by Farnace many a time for fighting duels with noblemen to a draw because she knows just how good he is. With that rapier, he's the Serial Pharrell of the Berserk universe for you Ice and Fire fans out there. Or you could also think of him as the world's greatest fencer, and he has the perfect frame for it too. Serpico is just above average in height, and he has a lean and toned physique, which makes his movements very flexible and agile. His spatial awareness is incredible, and we've already given you an example of that. The guy threw the Black Swordsman off his game with a damn branch, and everyone thought Farnace got him. What more do you want as evidence? His drawing style was praised by Guts himself, who admitted that his 0 to 60 in a millisecond draw, combined with the fact that he had no tell, made him a tricky opponent. Guts could anticipate the brief exchange they had after he kidnapped Farnace because he had been a fighter his entire life. It was second nature to him. Regular Joes like us would have no chance. All these things already make Serpico a pretty formidable opponent, but there is one trait that combines these threads and takes him from formidable to lethal. It's his intelligence, and that's on full display in round 1. Guts had just had a rather short but rather intense fight with the Great Goat. The bastard used its hooves to nearly crush Guts' ribs and spine twice, and he tried to skewer him with his horns on multiple occasions, but Guts was able to use his mini explosives to his advantage and quickly blew up and bisected the disgusting pseudo-apostle. This was his first time using the brand new bombs Rickard had created for him, and even Guts was surprised at how effective these things were. He compared their impact to his hand cannon, which is saying a lot. After he was done dealing with the Great Goat, he left the rest of the heretics for the Holy Iron Chain Knights to clean up and headed towards the back exit himself. Who should he find blocking his path but Serpico, who looked serious for the first time since their draw-off a few weeks ago. He greeted Guts by telling him he'd been waiting for him, but Guts didn't have time to waste. He needed to get out of there with Casca and quick. He fired off a crossbow bolt at Serpico, and when the Herald dodged that, he threw a mini explosive at him. Now usually this would have been enough to make anyone crazy enough to engage Guts one-on-one back off, off, and initially it looked like Serpico was going to do the same. But when he rose up out of the smoke, Rapier first, Guts knew he had a problem on his hands. Turns out, the Herald had used his insanely deceptive upper body strength to hang off the side of the cliff and then propel himself towards Guts' head in a thrusting motion. The Black Swordsman tried to go for his crossbow, but Serpico stabbed in the space between his hand and his weapon. Guts tried to draw Dragon Slayer, but Serpico's rapier got to the hilt before his hand did. He blatantly announced his strategy to Guts and openly admitted that he chose this place because it was perfect to block off all his offensive avenues. Guts' bulky frame and bulkier sword present a severe mobility issue to him on a path as narrow as the one they were fighting on, and Serpico was fast enough to not let him draw his sword. Plus, his back was to the sun while Guts faced it directly, limiting the latter's vision. He had taken into account every facet of Guts' fighting style and chosen this place precisely because he couldn't cause mayhem here. Serpico stated that facing Guts with big numbers was a stupid idea because once he got to chopping them up, it infects all others on the field with fear. So he chose to end this fight by himself because Guts was too distressing for Farnese. The Black Swordsman had to admit Serpi's chops when he got a few good licks in on his face and claimed that Serpico was a tougher opponent than the pseudo-apostle he just put down because it wasn't just strength with this guy, he had the mentality and the technique of an elite swordsman. He wasn't letting Guts reach Dragon Slayer, and he kept switching his attack pattern so Guts couldn't get a read on him. Serpico wasn't an evil man, but he knew how to use evilness to his advantage. He wanted to finish off Guts then and there preferably, so he used the fact that he was seemingly doing all this for those girls against him. Serpico claimed that his allies would have been caught up in the Holy Iron Chain Knight's web of watchers, but that was a blatant lie meant to throw Guts off balance. It worked momentarily because Guts was caught off guard by the comment, but he recovered strong. He'd been fighting battles since he was 6 years old. He knew naked provocation when he heard it. Instead of letting it disorient him, Guts focused up and managed to grab Serpico's rapier mid-thrust. The Herald was shocked because he never thought such a counter would present itself. He threatened to cut up Guts' palm by withdrawing the sword, thinking the threat of an injury would work on a guy like him. But we know Guts doesn't care about little scratches like that. The guy caught a saber with his bare teeth, for crying out loud. Stopping a teensy little needle like Serpico's was child play for him, and with his metallic left arm, so was breaking it in twain. The Black Swordsman probably thought that this meant it was game over. He fired off a crossbow bolt in Serpico's direction, but the enemy was more akin to a fox than a human. Serpico's incredibly quick reflexes helped him not only dodge the point-blank shot, but he was also able to pickpocket one of Guts' mini-bombs and use it as a distraction to get away. Both opponents praised each other's skills in their own way, but the result was clear. Once Serpico lost his sword, it was over for him. He didn't have any other weapons on him, and Guts had an arsenal. He didn't even pull out his sick Rambo-style dagger or bring his throwing knives into play, and he still managed to make Serpico retreat. So technically, it was a net win for Guts, but Serpico forced a stalemate with the infamous Black Swordsman with nothing but a rapier and his natural strength and mental aptitude. In fact, that he made it out of this exchange alive itself is a win for him, because most men don't have the luxury of saying that. Serpico is also the first human in a long time to give Guts a proper challenge, since BossCon and Griffith. So overall, we can look at round 1 as a stalemate, tilted in Guts' favor based on the outcome, but in Serpico's favor based on performance. After this, the two become allies because Farnese ended up secularizing herself after surviving the incarnation ceremony. Although Serpico still wasn't fully on board with this idea because he didn't like the changes Guts inspired in his mistress. He went along with it because his job was to protect his sister. Serpico became indispensable to the Black Swordsman party as a steward, information guide, and supporting fighter that could handle astral enemies just as well as Guts for the most part. His aloof, outwardly carefree nature became more charged with a sense of self and clear purpose. Being with Guts was changing him just as much as it was changing Farnese, and if you guys have learned one thing by now, it's that he doesn't like to change at all, especially when it puts his sister's life in mortal danger, which was all the time with Guts. So despite traveling with him, fighting beside him, and even going through prophetic happenings with him, Serpico couldn't bring himself to fully trust Guts, and that's when round 2 takes place. Guts versus Serpico, round 2. The final duel for Farnese's fate. Part of the reason Serpico couldn't fully trust Guts is the fact that he was always in danger, but another part of it is the fact that Guts is the owner of the Berserker Armour, and Serpico has seen Berserker Guts in action. The Herald is an extremely knowledgeable man, as a person in his post is required to be, so he is keenly aware of the legendary tales of Berserker warriors that would cut down anything in their path, friend and foe alike. So, when he sees Guts using the Berserker Armour for the first time at Flora's Spirit Tree Mansion, he knew instantly that this thing had just increased the risk to his sister's life exponentially. Guts nearly attacked his friends before Shirke got through to him and changed his mind. and it probably would have been fine with Serpico if this was a one-time thing. But then, on the way to Vertanis, Farnace's hometown, it almost happened again. As Guts was facing off against Daiba's Pishacha Ghana, he lost himself to the Berserker Armour's Ode when the Makara showed up. After savaging the beast, he had no other target to turn his attention towards, so he turned towards his friends. Thankfully, the Moonlight Boy's astral body made it into his psyche and managed to pull him out of that state of mind before he did something stupid. But this lapse in self-control didn't go unnoticed by Serpico. So, when they finally reached Vertanis, instead of helping Guts and his crew find a boat so they can continue their journey together, Serpico divided them. He struck a deal with his father that would keep Farnace back in Vertanis while Guts and the rest took her betrothed ship to their destination, Skellig Island. When it took the pair an unnaturally long time to make it back to the inn they were staying at, Guts decided to head to the castle and fetch them personally. When they arrived, Shirkei's magic helped them slip past the guards, but then they ran into a bigger problem, Emperor Ganishka's fog. They knew from their previous experience with the Pishacha that crap was about to hit the fan, and Guts wanted to find their allies as quickly as possible. It seemed as though their job was about to become easier because Serpico contacted Shirkei via thought transference and asked her to meet him at the rear entrance. But it became clear that his intent was to fight Guts. Because he didn't bring them to a pathway that leads to Farnace, he brought them to a chamber that was perfectly suited for his much-anticipated duel with Guts. The colonnade chamber of the Van Diemen estate was built back when Vertanis was under Kushan occupation, and it had been preserved after the castle was taken back as a monument to that victory. However, its many pillars made it feel like a concrete forest, with trees beset on every side a person stood. He apologized for tricking them into coming here, and he admitted that his proposal was a presumptuous one. But he had decided to give Guts what he whined for the first time they crossed swords with one another, a proper duel. The Black Swordsman accepted the challenge, thinking that this was just something they had to settle with steel, but for Serpico, it was much deeper. The two began their fight, and as Serpico had predicted, the many close-knit pillars of the chamber prevented Guts from using his Dragon Slayer to its fullest potential. He was forced to smash through pillars to make room, and Serpico exploited the delay this caused within his movements to make his strikes. He got a lick in on Guts' face with the first one, but every subsequent strike became increasingly difficult for him to land because of their clashing fighting styles and gear. That first strike was a mere graze because Guts deflected the majority of the thrust with his metal arm. Serpico's second strike bounced off of Guts' right pauldron, and he had to sidestep a direct downward slash from Dragon Slayer to get in his third, which too bounced off of the Berserker Armour. Guts' next attack nearly got Serpico's left arm, and he took a moment to marvel at his opponent's strength. Guts was injured beyond belief, and yet he fought with such tenacity. When he finally began thrusting Dragon Slayer at Serpico, the Herald knew what he had to do because this was the main reason he brought the fight to the colonnade. He parried the thrust with his sword and jabbed at Guts' grip, his aim being knocking Dragon Slayer out of his hands entirely. Serpico knew he had a limited area of attack available to him, that being Guts' face, his left arm up to the elbow, and his entire right hand. He knew that Guts gripped his sword with the right because that was his dominant hand. He was sure his strategy had played out the way he wanted it to, but then he realized he'd just hit metal. Guts switched his grip in anticipation of Serpico's anticipation, and this ramped up the tension even more. The Berserker Armour tried to take over Guts because he was clearly getting frustrated by this fight, but he bit his lip and prevented it from doing so. Serpico used the pillars to dart behind him and fire off a thrust towards his head, but Guts' reflexes proved superior once again. As the two warriors continued their mighty duel, the Herald reflected on just how much being a part of Guts' party had changed him. Serpico was a man that was as calm as still water, and just as adaptable. He could fit into any role he was given and bear witness to the most gruesome of sights whilst remaining completely unaffected. He realized now that he was a man numb to the world. Traveling with Guts made him see that he was a passive person for the most part. He saw the changes Guts' actions and words inspired in Farnace, something he couldn't do himself. He felt ineffectual but was glad all the same, which is why he didn't want her to die at the Berserker's hands. As Guts backed him up towards the final pillar in the colonnade chamber, Serpico prepared to unleash his ultimate strategy. When Guts smashed the pillar with Dragon Slayer, Serpico used the cornice to avoid the blade and watch as the ceiling caved in on Guts. Because the Black Swordsman had taken out most of the pillars in that vicinity, and ran his sword through the ceiling on multiple occasions, Serpico knew it was only a matter of time until he buried himself. What he didn't expect was Guts using the falling debris to turn the tables 180. With the flat side of Dragon Slayer, he maneuvered the falling rocks towards Serpico's body, defeating the Herald in decisive fashion. Having been beaten fair and square, all Serpico wanted to know now was what Guts intended to do when he saw Farnace. And Guts, for his part, said he didn't know, but he would see her all the same. This whole leaving things up to chance gig was new to Serpico, but he couldn't dispute the result of of the duel, so he chose to place his trust in Guts' indomitable spirit instead. Throughout this whole fight, Isidro and the rest had been watching with a mix of awe and surprise, but Isidro most of all because he aspired to become a swordsman, and now he was getting a front row seat to two of the best, duking it out in a proper duel. But Isidro was still a child, so he assumed they weren't serious. Guts gave him a harsh reality check when he clarified that he fought with killing intent and made it clear that this was the true life of a swordsman. Serpico eased Isidro's mind by saying that while they were fighting for real, Guts agreed to the tacit conditions of a duel, which is using only his sword to answer his enemy's attacks. He didn't use his crossbow, throwing knives, mini bombs, or arm cannon, and most of all, he didn't use the Berserker Armour. Serpico thought that this meant he wasn't a good enough fighter to bring out that armor's power, but it's actually the opposite. He was so good that Guts had to hold the armor back. Round 2 was a decisive victory for the Black Swordsman, and from this point forward, Serpico became a very close ally and confidant of Guts. The two men shared a drink and a heartfelt conversation once they reached Elfhelm, which finally saw Serpico trust Guts' instinct entirely. So, why exactly are we claiming round 3 might be a possibility, and how exactly would it be different? Well, it all comes back to the Berserker Armour. Guts vs. Serpico, round 3. The Black Beast versus the Sylph Warrior. Who would win? As things stand currently, it's quite possible that Serpico's original fears when it came to joining Guts on his journey will end up coming true, because right now, the Black Swordsman is convulsing within a pit of despair deeper than the abyss itself. Like we told you a few moments ago, Serpico and Guts finally reached a place where they truly understood each other after their second fight. Up until then, they'd collaborated on battles, but it was more of a two fighters fighting their own fights simultaneously kind of deal. After that second duel, Guts and Serpico actually worked as a team to take down Daiba's Kundalini and the Mad Sorcerer himself. Their diametrically opposed fighting styles actually complemented each other pretty well in the face of a magical foe like the Paramarishi Senani, primarily because of Serpico's Sylph sword and cloak. When the Black Swordsman party met Shirke for the first time, most of them were handed magical fetishes that fit their personalities and fighting styles. Serpico became the owner of the Sylph cloak and the Sylph sword, two items imbued with the power of wind elementals. With the cloak, he could levitate and fly around at a measured distance, increasing his range of attack exponentially. With the sword, he could slice through any target, harnessing the cutting power of a wild storm. These two things proved to be critical to Guts and Serpico's victory against the Kundalini, which was an extremely potent Pishacha that could command water elementals on a massive scale. After this, the pair fought together on the Sea God's Island, and then again when they first arrived at Elfhelm, because the mages didn't much like outside folk. Before Guts' breakdown, Serpico was an admirer of his courage and brazen strength. After it, he became a concerned ally who couldn't believe that the Black Swordsman was submitting to Kushan capture so meekly. Isidro broke down when he saw Guts being chained up like a common beast, but Serpico's quiet disbelief hit harder because it was rare seeing him getting caught off guard like that. His being concerned about someone besides Farnese is character development in and of itself, but that also brings us to what we said at the start of this section. It's looking more likely than ever that Serpico's original fears might just come true. We have no word on when chapter 376 is going to drop, but when it does, what we want to see is how Guts recovers from his current situation, because that's going to dictate the flow of the Eastern Exile chapter. For Griffith, the path is clear. In chapter 372, he declared he was going to head east, and by chapter 375, it became clear why. The remnants of the Kushan Empire had rallied under the leadership of Salat and Daiba, and they posed a significant magical threat to his own domain, given just how deep Ganishka's sorcery wing was during the Midland invasion. But for Guts, it's up in the air, because the last time he was conscious, he was being taunted by his Beast of Darkness. Chapter 373 to 74 were the lowest we've ever seen Guts emotionally, and the parting words of his own malignance were to set him free in exchange for true power. Because the Beast had become merged with the Berserker Armour in terms of its symbolism with relation to the series, it's not very difficult to discern what's going on here. But that also clarifies why we think Guts vs. Serpico round 3 is more of a reality than a pipe dream. Guts giving in to his bloodlust and killing the people he's been trying to protect has been foreshadowed pretty much ever since he got the Berserker Armour. As things stand, there's a 50-50 chance that that is exactly what will end up happening. But if it's up to Serpico, he won't go down without a fight, especially if Farnese might end up being caught in the crossfire. So, if Guts does lose his sanity entirely and gives in to the Berserker, Serpico will be one of the only people uniquely suited to fighting him, because he knows each and every trick in Guts' playbook. Having fought beside him for so long, Serpico has come to analyze every single move Guts makes and reason why he makes it, but that also means he knows once the armor takes over, all logic flies out the window and Guts becomes feral in his pursuit of a target. If Serpico decides to fight him without his sylph cloak and sword, the fight would last a maximum of 2 seconds. Berserker Guts would blitz and devour him before he could even move, but with those 2 items, Serpico still might have a shot at forcing a stalemate, if not achieving outright victory. See, the thing is, the only way to defeat Guts as a Berserker is to break his mental link with the armor, and that can only happen one of 2 ways, by invading his psyche or by outright killing him. If he fights with the armor in its full effect for too long, that will end up happening anyway, so drawing out the battle could be critical, and Serpico's Sylph Cloak will be the key to that aspect of their third battle. His sword can generate many windstorms, which can also come into play when trying to impede Guts' movements. Serpico is a master tactician, and in his hands, these 2 fetishes can be wielded to their maximum potential. But the big question then becomes, what if he can't draw the fight out at all? What if Shirke fails to bring Guts back? Because as of late, she's been thinking she's the one doing that, when it has been the Moonlight Boy, and to say that that isn't going to work anymore would be an understatement. The Moonlight Boy is responsible for Guts' current instability in a way. It's possible that the Sylph Sword's immense cutting power could slice through the Berserker armor far better than his Rapier, but the armor repairs itself as the user fights, so it would ultimately be pointless. A flash victory isn't possible, and a long drawn-out battle is an option only if you can isolate Guts long enough, which, again, won't exactly be as easy as eating an apple. So, round 3 would be a brutal victory for Guts unless Serpico had backup and prep time, and we're not sure if even those things would be enough. Marvelous verdict! When it comes to a third fight between Guts and Serpico, it's evident that it's a circumstantial affair, but if it happens, that's all the context you need for it, and what we think is a pretty objective assessment of the fight itself. Serpico would need a deus ex machina of the highest order to beat Berserker Guts, and if he got Farnese killed accidentally, he'd never be able to live with himself, which would only make him want to kill Guts even more. But that's just our opinion. What's yours? Do you think Serpico has a shot at the Black Swordsman? Let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep on struggling, strugglers.